Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, taking care of business on Canada's podcast network. Joining me today is Franco Terrazzano, who is Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Thank you, Franco, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, Canadians are going to be in for a surprise in 2023, I understand, when it comes to tax hikes that they'll be facing. Tell me what's going to be happening.
Well, unfortunately, brace for impact because we have 5 federal tax hikes happening in 2023. You have the CPP tax up, the EI tax up, the carbon tax up, alcohol taxes, you guessed it, up. And then to make matters worse, you also have the federal government implementing what is a second carbon tax through fuel regulations in 2023.
Let's talk about each of them. Let's start with CPP, obviously, and what can we expect there?
Yeah, so here's what's going to be happening with the CPP mandatory payments that you must pay to the government. In 2023, if you're making $67,000 or more, you're paying an extra $255 through the CPP tax. Your employer is also going to have to cough up that amount as well. Through the EI tax, the mandatory payments that you must make to the government through the EI payments, that's going up by about $50 as well in 2023. So the tax increase is about $300 in the new year. But Mario, that downplays the total burden of payroll taxes, right? That's just the increase. If you look at the total amount that you're going to have to pay in 2023, it's about $4,700, right? And we're not talking about fat cats here. We're talking about people squarely in the middle class, right? We're talking about people, if you're making $67,000 or more, you're paying about $4,700 to the government through these payroll taxes. That's a huge amount of money. But wait a second, your employer also has to put in about $5,100 in total in 2023.
Okay, and let's talk a little bit about the carbon taxes and the second carbon tax. First of all, tell me what's going to take place with the carbon tax, and then what is this second carbon tax?
Well, let's start with the carbon tax, right? We all know the carbon tax is increasing the price of the pumps. It's making it more expensive to heat your homes. And then, of course, too, every time you go to the grocery store, you're in effect feeling the carbon tax there because how do they get the groceries to the store? Well, they have to bring it by truck. And of course, that raises costs as well. Well, on April the 1st, it's not a joke, I swear, the carbon tax is going up to 14 cents per liter of gasoline. Now, Mario, many of your listeners have probably heard the Trudeau government claim that the carbon tax and rebate scheme is making families better off. But the government's own independent, nonpartisan budget watchdog, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, shows that's magic math. In fact, in 2023, the carbon tax will cost the average family anywhere from $400 all the way up to $800 and about $50, even after the rebates. So we're talking about hundreds of dollars extra what your family is going to be losing out on because of the carbon tax, even after those rebates. And Mario, I have the what I like to say sometimes, unfortunately, I live in Ottawa, so I'm dealing with bureaucrats all the time. And you know what I tell them? I say, hey, look, if you think that the government is going to raise taxes, skim some off the top to pay for a bunch of new bureaucrats, and then somehow make people better off, well, then I got an Ocean View property in Medicine Hat that I want to sell you.
Okay, so I guess I just don't get it in terms of all the carbon taxes and the second carbon tax and why we're there. But I'm I'm probably like many Canadians. The last tax is the one close to my heart. I'm going to have to be paying more for beer, I guess.
Oh no, I know. If this conversation drives you to drink, well, I've got some more bad news for you, right? Because every time you get that bottle of Pinot to enjoy with your better half, or the case of IPA to enjoy with your buddies, or if you just want some rum to go with that Coke that you have, well, you're going to be paying more in 2023 as well. Actually, we have a major tax hike coming in 2023, and let me tell you why. In the 2017 federal budget, the government brought in what's known as an alcohol escalator tax. But essentially, that increases the federal taxes on alcohol every year with inflation. Well, Mario, what's going on with inflation right now? it's sky high, which means that the tax increase in 2023 is also going to be sky high. We're looking at about a 6.3% federal tax hike on beer, on wine, on hard alcohol like vodka, rum, or whiskey. But again, the increase downplays the total burden, because what most Canadians don't know is every time you go to the liquor store, 50% of that case of beer, taxes. 65% of that bottle of wine, taxes. 3/4 plus of any type of those hard alcohols like scotch, taxes. Okay. So here's what we did for our New Year's Eve party. We picked up about 2 cases of beer, 2 bottles of wine, and a nice big bottle of vodka. That cost us about 150 smackers, $93 taxes, $150 in total, $93 of that taxes.
Unbelievable. Tell me, so what is the impact of all this? First of all, on consumers, the average Joe, me and you, and then second of all, on just business in general. What's going to be the impact of rising taxes for the average Joe and Josephine in Canada?
Yeah, let's talk about how me and you and everyone who as consumers are going to be impacted. So it's kind of a double impact that we're seeing, right? Because on the one hand, you have inflationary taxes that raise prices, right? The whole point of the carbon tax is to raise the price of gasoline, raise the price of home heating. But on the other hand, not only are we seeing prices go up, but then we're having less money to afford the higher prices, because then you see tax hikes like the payroll taxes that are taking money, right?
Yeah.
So we have higher prices, lighter wallets, higher prices, lighter wallets. But we also have to talk about businesses too, right? Because businesses are being impacted.
Yeah.
And we have to remember what happened over the last 2+ years. Well, so many small businesses were worried that their savings weren't going to keep the lights on, hanging on by a thread. Well, imagine that small business owner, that maybe gym owner down the street, the restaurant owner down the street. Well, they're going to have to pay an extra $5,100 for each of their middle class workers through payroll taxes alone. Then they have the carbon tax that increases their natural gas bill. So the businesses that are the backbone of our economy, who are holding on by a thread, are also going to be taking it on the chin because of these tax hikes. So if I can just sum up, it's the middle-class Canadians that are going to feel the pain of higher prices and lighter wallets, and then it's the small businesses that are particularly going to feel the most pain from all these different tax hikes as well.
Okay, and here's what I don't get, and I know that I don't like to get into political discussions usually, but this is obviously a political decision. So you have the Liberals in government who are raising all these taxes. You have a party, the NDP, propping them up in government, a party that supposedly, is looking after the poor and unfortunate Canadians, the average Canadians, the middle class Canadians. What gives there? Like, why?
Yeah. It's hard to understand just what type of political calculus they're trying to figure out here. Because look, on one side of their mouth, they're talking about, we have to address inflation. We have to help with affordability. Well, what they're doing is essentially seeing this fire of inflation spread across Canada. Then they're going to the gas station, filling up a jerry can, and pouring the gasoline on the inflation fire. They're making things worse. I don't understand it. Now, you do have the official opposition, which is the Conservative Party. They are talking about cutting taxes, right? Mr. Poilievre, he essentially ran a leadership campaign, essentially saying he would scrap the carbon tax, reject the second carbon tax, and the alcohol escalator taxes. So you were really seeing differences here. You have the federal government, the Liberals, the NDP, that are talking about spending more. And of course, the more the government spends, the more they have to tax. And then you are seeing the official opposition at least talk about cutting taxes. Now, who knows if they're going to keep their word on that? That's something that groups like ours are going to have to do to hold them accountable.
Okay. And Franco, when we look, obviously, let's look at it from the side of the government, right? The government will probably, talk about the need to raise taxes because there a lot of the services that they need to support Canadians with, and programs, et cetera, et cetera. The carbon tax, excuse me, the carbon tax is another story because there's more involved in that. So why can't the government, is the government in a no-win situation? Is there anything they can do? Anything they can do other than raise taxes to raise revenue?
No, they want to live high off the hog. They want to live high off the taxpayer hog. They don't want to end the taxpayer party. Look, the more pay raises that the government gives itself, the less money that parents have to put their kids in hockey practice. Okay, like it's as simple as that. We saw members of parliament give themselves 3 pay raises during the pandemic. Like let that sink in there for a second. While so many Canadians lost their job, took pay cuts, maybe lost their small business that they worked hard their whole life, our supposed representatives gave themselves 1, 2, 3 pay raises. 300,000 bureaucrats in the federal government got at least 1 raise. Crown corporations that have been failing, the Bank of Canada gave its central bankers $45 million in bonuses and raises. And then you hear these stories where someone in the federal government, who could it have been, spent $6,000 per night on a single hotel room. You have the governor general and her entourage racking up nearly 6 figures on fancy airplane food like beef Wellington, beef carpaccio, pork stuffed tenderloin. If that's not living high off the hog at the taxpayer expense, then I honestly don't know what it is. And look, I think you might push me back and be like, Franco, well, those are, some little expenses. Okay, but let's talk about the big expenses. In the April budget, Freeland said she would spend $452 billion this year. In the mid-year budget update, she now says she's going to spend $472 billion. So in the span of 7 months, Freeland is already on track to spend $20 billion over her own budget. What's $20 billion? Okay, if she didn't spend $20 billion over budget, she could cut the GST by 2%, real savings for taxpayers, and still lower the deficit. So they're spending money like crazy, and that's why the cost of living is going up like crazy.
Do you think the Canadians have reached the point where they're quote unquote mad as hell and not going to take it anymore?
Oh, that's a good question. And I think it differs for different people. And quite frankly, I think it differs for different regions of Canada, right? Like, look, we have seen the tale of 2 pandemics. So the people who are shielded by the golden government gates, whether it's bureaucrats, whether it's politicians, whether it's some businesses who are getting corporate welfare or getting special privileges, I'm sure they're just happy, right? I'm sure business is booming for that sector. But for the people who have been taking it on the chin, for the small businesses who just want less red tape, lower taxes, and their politicians to spend their money wisely, I do think Canadians are getting fed up. Look, I have been seeing more Canadians put food back at the grocery store than I can ever remember. This is the most I've ever heard Canadians talk about inflation or rising interest rates that I can ever remember. So I do think that many Canadians just simply can't afford the rising cost of government.
All right. Well, Franco, I appreciate you joining us today. I've got to go. I've got to go to the liquor store and stock up on food before the end of the year.
Yeah, well, I just appreciate you having me on, and Happy New Year to you and your audience.
All right. Thank you, Franco. That's Franco Terrazzano, who is Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, taking care of business on Canada's Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us today.